We are back with another episode of Mixtape Podcast, and today I am very excited to have Omar Mirza on my podcast. Dr. Omar Mirza, to be more specific. He is a practicing psychiatrist in the United States, and the reason he is here, I'm not going to talk about the medical profession with him per se. We're going to talk about comic books because in his I don't know if you can call it an alter ego or sort of part-time, he makes comics books as well. Welcome to the podcast, Umar.
Thank you, Fatma. Thank you for having me here. I'm so humbled and grateful to be with you and to discuss my interests.
So let's start off. The first question is going to be a very typical one. I'm pretty sure you have, given you're part of the Desi community, you must have heard this many times in different variations. Science and art are not really seen as something that coexists. They are usually seen as you are either into the science world or you're into the art world. How did this combination came about?
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting question and one that I love to answer because this was something I myself wrestled with. You know, growing up in a Desi family and learning that there's some traditional careers that we are guided to. Art was never something that I saw compatible with the science or mathematics, those traditional fields of study. And so when I was growing up, I had a very strong interest in art, but also an equally strong interest in science and mathematics. And I felt that these were two polar opposites. The more I studied both of these and the further I got in my career, I realized that was actually, I think, a mistake to think that these two things are separate. That divide, I think, is artificial. I mean, if you look at some of our greatest scientific minds, like Da Vinci was also one of our most phenomenal artists. And I think you even look at the neuroscience behind this, that the artistic brain and the scientific brain are not separate. And for some reason that these two disciplines have been artificially divided. And I think that that's probably due to a lot of like the economics of how each of these fields is compensated. And so while I understand people might say, oh, you know, science and math are not, or sorry, science and art are not compatible. They are absolutely, I think, compatible. And you know, interestingly enough, it's something that I've come back to now in my role as a physician. I teach at the medical school. And one of our core courses in the first year of medical school is actually called the Art and Science of Medicine. And even though the students are not explicitly taught drawing and painting, they're taught that science and medicine is really an art. It's an art form. It's practiced. And it's not something that just lives in textbooks. And so for me, the idea that these two things are separate, I think it fails to really understand them. And when you see a good physician or a good architect or engineer, they think like an artist. A lot of what they do is creativity, and they visualize things and they put together things. And a lot of what they do is almost a performance in many ways. And so when you think about it, and when you really get to the highest level of those fields, it becomes art. And so I think it's really important for us to remember this, that these two cannot exist separately. They really are two parts of the same thing.
That's a very interesting way to put it, because I didn't think of it as a specific art form when we talk about sciences. But I have recently, with some recent experiences, I've realized that even sciences need to have a very human element into it, and I think that also connects to having that artistic side to yourself.
Yeah. Even to flip on this, people sometimes dismiss art, but art is very scientific. Yeah. You can't go there without any sort of rules and fundamentals. There are fundamentals. There's, if you look at the way colors are mixed, there's so much science behind that. There's science behind the way that things appeal, symmetry, shapes. These are all science. And even, our performance of let's say in sort of like acting or singing. I mean, music is math. If you don't appreciate the connection, then you don't really understand the field. And so I think that when people look at artists and they say, oh, they don't really study any fundamentals or principles, they just go and do things, and that really fails to understand the amount of the knowledge and a theory that those artists have really spent their life studying and accumulating, and so I think that and if you look at the amount of work you have to put in to become a fantastic artist or a good physician, it's no different. It's just slightly different in terms of the focus, but the same attitude that you apply to, let's say, study for your USMLEs, to become a physician, and if you put that same effort behind understanding music theory, it's ultimately very much the same thing. So I don't think that art is any easier than science, or science any harder than art. They're all fields of study, and I think that it's important for us to not minimize either one.
So just share how you got into comic books, specifically this form.
Yeah.
Obviously, we were talking about art, and obviously storytelling is something that you can find and connect to in any field. But how did you got attracted to this very specific form of storytelling, and where did it started? And you can elaborate on that. But the characters you portray, obviously, when we talk about comic books, for our generation, the more specific point of reference is maybe all that Marvel universe sort of aspect, Marvel and DC comics, and if you want to do it more humane side of it, the Archie comics. So the one you have come up with a very different and very culturally connected storytelling through your comic book series. So just share how did that sort of came.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I grew up in Ohio, which is, if you're familiar with the United States, kind of in the center of it. So you could think of a very traditional American youth, in that I was exposed to comic books through a friend who had got a large shipment of actually manga and anime from his cousin in Japan. And, I think I was probably maybe 9 or 10 at the time. And, you saw these amazing arts and these drawings and then these stories. And when we flipped through each one of them, it just, transported you into a world that you had never seen before. And so that was just so captivating. It was electrifying to kind of be a part of that. And my friend said, here, I'll give you one for free. And it just started the sort of love affair with comics. And then from there, I started to get more into comics. They sold them in the grocery store in many of our stores. So when my mom would be going and shopping for groceries, I would run to the part of the store where they had all the comic books in the shelves, and just spend the entire time she was at the store looking through each of these comics and seeing superheroes and the colors and all the action. And so that really, again, continued to sort of inspire that sort of desire to escape into these fantasy worlds. And so naturally, then I continued this, and mind you, this was far before the Marvel Cinematic Universe came out. So, this was pre even Blade, if you want to talk about the movies. And so at this time, it really wasn't popular, say, broadly popular to be really into these types of characters. But it was something I continued to kind of collect and be involved with as a kid. But what was absent at the time, and I didn't really appreciate this, was there was nobody who looked like me in the comic book. And so a lot of times I would identify with the white character, Superman, Batman. But, it wasn't until I got much older, and particularly, post 9/11, that it became very apparent to me that this doesn't represent me. I think, we lived in America particularly, we lived in sort of a sheltered existence pre 9/11, where we thought, okay, having migrated to the United States, my parents, and being born here, that I was automatically considered American in the way that any other American was considered. But I think the othering of Pakistanis particularly, or anybody who was Muslim, didn't become very obvious until post 9/11. And then it was very clear that it was us versus them in many of our situations. And so then the absence of characters that look like you became very apparent. You started to notice more and more that, hey, I don't look like this, and people don't look at me like they look at Bruce Wayne or sort of Clark Kent. That somebody who looks like me could never be a Clark Kent, or who is the alter ego of Superman. And so this started to kind of ignite this idea that I need to see more characters like myself. And at that time, that was 2001, and so still way before I had had any sort of real attempt to make comics. But then in about 2014, 2015, after I had finished medical school and was looking to start my residency, it became clear to me that this passion for comics, something that I'd always dreamed about doing one day, it could either happen then or never. At that point I was like, I'm about to become even more deeply invested in this medical career, and if I don't try to scratch this itch before I'm fully in that, I may never do it again. And so I took a leap of faith and I said, okay, let's make a comic book. And immediately, I was thinking through ideas of what I might want to do, and it was so fundamentally obvious to me that it had to be centered and focused on people who represented my identity. So Pakistanis in particular, who are noticeably absent in comics. Now, we're blessed because right the same year that I had sat down to start penning this book, G. Willow Wilson and Sana Amanat at Marvel put out, or had started to announce the sort of start of Miss Marvel, who was the first Pakistani-American Marvel superhero. And so it was good timing in that, I think there was more appetite for this. And so, while hers was a distinctly modern character kind of inserted into sort of the environment of America, I recognized that the story I wanted to tell was a sort of distinctly different, which represented more of the Pakistan that my parents kind of left. Granted, my parents were not alive during the Mughals, but I wanted to represent sort of like a romanticized renaissance of what the Muslim world, particularly in the Indus Valley, could look like and what it could produce. In many of the ways, we see these romanticized King Arthur and sort of this very Eurocentric history. There's a real absence of that type of historical fantasy centered in the Indus Valley. And so, while we think of, the Europeans as a sort of like the Renaissance, and, at the time, we were way ahead of them in terms of creating culture and art. And I think also what was important for me was not to show a sort of a very American aesthetic, because we've seen New York City in sort of many different facets. In Spider-Man, New York City is the sort of background. Even you could argue Metropolis, where Superman and sort of a lot of his work is done, is basically a New York City. Batman functions in a Gotham City, which is, again, very reminiscent of sort of like a New York or a very Western sort of downtown. But you don't see any of the settings of the other parts of the world aside from the far, far east. And so I said, hey, look, I want to take something into a time period which was probably our most productive and beautiful, and show an aesthetic that was very distinctly us. And so that's why I picked the Mughals, and I thought that was a nice setting in terms of showing what a Muslim empire could really accomplish, and show all the different, interactions with non-Muslims at that time, as well as, the arts and culture of our area. So, the clothing, the fabrics, the textiles, the foods, I wanted to be really immersed in that environment. So that way, in addition to seeing somebody with our skin color, you could actually see the environment that they were existing in. And I thought that is a great way to breed some understanding and fondness for, communities that had historically sort of been neglected. If you look at what media can do, and I'll try to wrap this up in a second, but if you look at what media can do, media can really bring familiarity and appreciation for stories and communities that have often been sort of sidelined or misunderstood. And I think the best example of this in sort of the West is how the LGBTQ community really, with some I think really positive characters in their media, had sort of brought a new understanding and empathy for the situation that they've been in. And I think that what we've failed to do, and not intentionally, but post 9/11, all the media that you see about Muslims has been overwhelmingly negative and sort of structured around the idea of terrorism. And so, you Google India for say, it was a sort of thought experiment. I said, Google India once, and you Google India and you see beautiful pictures of Taj and elephants and Holi. You Google Pakistan and you see fighter jets Taliban, and all these like images that seem very negative. And there's not really much difference short of a border why would the images be so vastly different? You don't see the like swath, you don't see the northern areas, you don't see Basant in the Google image search. You see these like horribly scary images. And I said that alone just tells you what has been happening in terms of sort of the media sort of, I guess, battle, quote unquote. And so for me, it was very important to put something out there that would maybe contribute to new imagery that might change that perception, particularly post 9/11. So that's where I was at. And then, being a psychiatrist, I'm obviously very interested in stories, people's motivations, their histories, and how those contribute to sort of the choices that they make. And so, creating, I would say, dynamic characters that are more in depth and allow you to become familiar with the different types of people that might come from our region was an important part for me. So that's sort of the long story of the genesis of the comic.
That's very interesting because, as you said, and I totally agree, that I think we need to take ownership of our culture, our diversity, because if you go and take a deep dive into our cultural history, we were diverse way before the Western world actually understood, I would say, the concept. The entire this colonization process, when they came in, and a lot of things that now our culture is associated with as saying that, no, this is wrong, these are taboos. They were basically introduced by them when they were here and ruling us. They were very much originally part of our culture. And you're very, very much right with the example you gave between obviously India and Pakistan. You also see the reinforcement in Hollywood movies. I mean, they're showing Pakistan, but speaking Arabic, and we don't know Arabic other than outside. Most of us don't know Arabic outside the Quran. So I think, as you said, it's not deliberate, but I blame our community in itself, be it in America or anywhere, even in Pakistan, that we haven't really pushed or made an effort into telling our stories. We let other people do the storytelling, and when you do that, they're going to use their ideas and their narratives, and not, why would giving.
No, absolutely. And it ties so nicely back to the original point, which is, I think we can do such good in cultural ambassadorship through creating great minds scientifically in terms of medicine, but those people are only going to have a very limited reach. But if you create great art as a culture, that has a global reach, that has a sort of a viral reach that is going to far exceed the capabilities of even putting out the best doctors. I mean, there's no doubt that Pakistan puts out fantastic doctors. I mean, every year we import them by the busload to America, yet their ability to combat our public relations crisis is only so far as how many patients they can interact with. There isn't that sort of global scale, but you have something like a cultural sort of ambassador like Coke Studios or some of the things that we've really invested in culture, and those things transcend the abilities of what 100 good doctors could do, or even 1,000 good doctors could do. And I'm not criticizing doctors, I'm one of them, but I think that there's a real, like you said, a missed opportunity in Pakistan to celebrate the value and importance of our artists, whether it be people who are writing poetry or writing prose, people who are performing, whether it be music or theater. Food is such a way for us to relate to other cultures. You may have never gone to Mexico, but you know what a taco is and a burrito, or you've never been to China, but Chinese food is your favorite, non-Pakistani food. So those are great ways for us to create ambassadorship with other cultures. And I think if we were really disturbed by the way that Pakistan is perceived globally, then we really need to rethink how we approach that. And it's not by creating more PhDs or MDs or engineers. While we should still do that, I certainly don't think there's ever going to be a time where aunties and uncles don't create MDs and engineers and the such. But I think what needs to happen is to recognize if you have that talent that's brewing, the talent for art or any of the performances, that we should nurture that in the same way we would nurture somebody who's got great scores for becoming a engineer or doctor. And I think that that's the big missed opportunity, is that we try to take those people who've got beautiful talents and strip it away and try to redirect it into something that maybe they're not interested in. And so that's why I think being a person of integrating those two things, I can speak to that. I think that oftentimes people say, I've heard many times artists kind of complain that they're not taken seriously, their craft is not taken seriously. And I can say, someone who's done both sides, who's gone to medical school and who's seen the artistic world, I can say there's nothing that's easier about the artistic world that that would make it simple for a doctor to just switch. No, it's actually very difficult, and the same effort that somebody puts into becoming a physician, I think, is the same hard work and blood, sweat, and tears that people put in towards their artistic crafts, and we should support that.
So just share. I know when we spoke when you were starting out, that you had just one series that was focused with the with themes and inspiration and characters from the Mughal period. But now you've obviously diversified. You did something during that Trump period as well. So just share the number of series you have done and sort of what sort of things go into the character development. Do you do it single-handedly? Do you have a team? How does all that work?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my first series, which I think some of you might be familiar, is Zindaan, which is I'd say my marquee series, the one that really I think I put most of my investment in, and that is a true sort of passion project. All of them are, but that was sort of like the most authentically just wanting to get the message out and create a world of fantasy in sort of the Mughal Empire. After that, right around 2016, we had the sort of, I would say, international disaster of Trump in the United States, and that created a lot of anger, as a Pakistani-American who was watching this person fan the flames of racism and bigotry and bring out all the ugliness in America. And so at that time, I was feeling very frustrated, like, what can I do? I think much like, you guys are going through in Pakistan right now with sort of the political upheaval. And I said, hey, let me sort of use this sort of side talent and hobby to express and put into words what I was feeling in a way that people could see. And so created this political satire called the Incapable Trump, which is a play on the Incredible Hulk, a very sort of famous Marvel series. And it was a sort of very pointed critique at Trump and his presidency and sort of all the sort of things that went into it. And it was sort of my way to one, I think express the frustration and anger, but two, as a form of therapy to kind of really work through the feelings that we were feeling when he was in office and trying to make a statement. And then I think that's what most good art pieces do, is that they try to invite you to feel something or think. And that was the sort of effort behind that. So that was a sort of a second series, which went for 4 years, and thank God that presidency ended, and with that, the series no longer needed to exist. So that was the second. And then I've done a few other anthologies where it's a collection of works with others. One was it was called the Black Stories Matter, which was in the sort of wake of George Floyd, who was murdered by the police here in America, to create stories that talk about how we see Black people as less than human, and then sort of talk about that and bring those stories to the forefront. And so that was one anthology and contributed to, and there was a few others. And then most recently, I kind of really fully kind of came full circle and integrated medicine and comics, and I've started sort of an academic psychiatry series called the CL Psychiatrist, which teaches medical students and doctors some sort of specific concepts within psychiatry using comic books as a teaching tool. So that's where we're at. In terms of how I create the characters, a lot of it is based off of, one of the things you do as a psychiatrist is you listen to stories all day. So in some ways, you're kind of this encyclopedia of world experiences, just based off of all the different things people have gone through. And so at some point, you have a very vast library of the human experience, like what things people go through, how they react, the feelings that they have. And so I'm certain that has kind of seeped into the ways I construct my characters. And then the other is to think about, what am I trying to say? What is the sort of meaning behind the story that I'm trying to portray? And I create the characters around that to help advance that specific point. And I think that's one of the sort of, if you want to talk about fundamentals of art, one of the fundamentals in sort of writing I learned is that, you have to have a sort of a message that you want to portray. And in every page or every line, you need to be thinking about how does this, dialogue or this interaction service that message that I'm trying to say. And so sort of let's use that to create my characters, and that how are these characters in this story helping progress that message that I'm saying. And so that's how I construct them.
What has been the reaction so far?
The reaction's been amazing. One of the things that I think has been most exciting is that the reaction from the non-Desi community, because we present at New York Comic Con, which is basically the second biggest comic convention after San Diego Comic Con. And I can't tell you how many people come up to me and they're excited to see these types of characters for the same reasons that, you and I might enjoy it, which is it shows a different part of the world. It shows, the beauty and the culture of Pakistan and the Indus Valley. But people are so excited, all different. The Black community is probably one of the most supportive. Then you have people who are also from, let's say, Latin America, or people who have ties to Far East Asia. They also all resonate with this. Interestingly enough, the Pakistani community is definitely supportive, but not as supportive as I had expected. And there's some people who even say, "Hey, I teach, history, and the Mughal era is my favorite," and I'm just so blown away that somebody would even know. And that's it. The feedback hasn't always been that glowingly supportive. Some people, I remember the first time I had a booth set up at a convention, and it said "The Mughals are coming," which is to kind of preview the series that was coming. And I remember one family came by and they said, "Oh, the Mughals are coming. It's a new Harry Potter series." And I felt so bad. I was like, they don't even know who the Mughals are. But it was okay. That was like probably the least supportive feedback I've had. Nobody has been sort of overtly hostile about it. Everybody's been really amazing and excited and supportive, and it feels great. Particularly, I think I'll say this. One time I was at UPNA, which is the Pakistani physician meeting in America. And I was doing a little talk about it, and I had some of our characters. We have these 10-foot tall banners of our characters, real big, in the same way you might see Spider-Man outside a movie theater. And I remember seeing a small Pakistani boy who was so impressed with the characters because they looked like him. And he turned to his mom and he said, "Can they come to my birthday party?" And that was probably the greatest feedback I've ever had, to see this sort of like light in his eyes when he saw characters that look like him, and to be excited to bring them to his birthday party in the way you might want Spider-Man or Batman to show up at your birthday party. And so that felt really good, and I felt like something that I would have liked when I was his age to have the opportunity to have. So I'm just excited to be a part of the movement towards having this type of representation, where it will be very normal for us to see characters like this, not only in comics but hopefully all over Netflix and movies, etc., etc.
So just let's talk about your latest series, which is the mental health one, where you actually brought in your profession and sort of gelled it, and it's just obviously you are a psychiatrist, so obviously I don't have to say what inspired you, but given that now finally I can speak from the Pakistani perspective, that now here as well, that people have started talking about mental health. Obviously, we have a long way to go when it comes to resources and sort of, but it's getting a little bit more destigmatized. So why did you choose now to incorporate these two aspects of your life together?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think for the longest time, I still, even though I had sort of engaged in both of these interests, I still deeply sort of embrace this idea that they couldn't be mixed. They're oil and water. So I could be both of these people as an individual, but I couldn't mix the two. That art and science have to be sort of separate. And it wasn't until I picked up this volume called the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, which was a work piece put out by a group of physicians and healthcare workers who had engaged in integrating comics and medicine years before me, and they'd kind of come to this brilliant idea that we'll call this graphic medicine. And when I read this volume, I said, oh my God, I mean, how couldn't I think of this earlier, that as a physician I can write comics that are based off of the topic of what I've studied my whole life to sort of do. And so why I chose that now, and partially because I realized, hey, this is possible, but two, a lot of what I do is as an academic psychiatrist. I teach medical students and residents here in America, and the biggest thing I noticed was that teaching is oftentimes very difficult when you're assigning readings, like in the textbook or even sort of our academic articles, because they're very sort of dense, and oftentimes the way people consume information these days so rapidly, there's not really the patience or appetite for that. And I was trying to think of new ways to teach my students. And I thought, hey, every time I tell them about, Zindaan or the Incapable Trump, they're all really ears. And I thought, why not use that sort of magic that the comic books generate to help teach? And so I basically, took down lectures that I've taught many, many times, and I just converted them into comics. And it was so easy for me. It was so natural because I'd taught these things so many times. The writing just kind of flowed out of me. And so, I worked with the teams, and we put out these educational, volumes, so that way we can help increase the sort of expertise in certain aspects of psychiatry for my trainees and my residents.
Are these comic books, specifically the mental health series, available for general public as well, or are they a bit more academic focused?
Yeah, they are very sort of subject focused, but that said, it's applicable to everybody. I mean, the first volume is really about medical decision making, and how, as a patient in America particularly, there's a strong support for the patient to make the decisions. Now, medicine and certainly, medicine, I think, all over the world is a very paternalistic sort of discipline, where they believe the doctor knows best, and that the patient is just a passenger on the ride. And in the sort of medical ethics, we have pushed back on that, based off of a lot of abuse that's happened in healthcare, that, the patient really has to take a more centered role in their decision-making, and it shouldn't be the physicians forcing that on them. And so this talks about sort of how we as psychiatrists within the mental health field address the issue of autonomy or decision-making. But while it's focused sort of on that assessment, it is available to everybody, I think, to inform themselves. And I hope that I wrote it in a way that most people can understand. Recently, I went to the University of Chicago to present this in their graphic medicine course, which is for undergraduates, so people who are not in the medical field yet. And they seem to be able to conceptualize and understand the topics very well, and I think they felt it was very applicable. Just as sort of pop culture side note, there's that big Free Britney movement, which was successful this past year, and this deals with the issues of guardianship and capacity, where people's decision making can be taken away from them. And so I think it is applicable or available to a wide audience.
That even your mental health series is is something that the local a general audience can understand. So where can people actually access your works? You can share both within America and outside, and also share if it's just in the hard copy version, or are there digital forms for it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. No. So in terms of Zindaan, Zindaan is available on our website, www.thelastunsars.com. If you Google Zindaan comic book, it should lead you there. It's available on Comixology, which is an app, Amazon-based app that allows you to read it digitally. You can buy it in print in the US, but outside the US, we don't have it available in print yet. We do have The Incapable Trump is one of these books that's available on an Android app. You can download it, I think, and you can read it digitally through there. And then the CL Psychiatrist, which is the psych text, that is available on Amazon. Both, it will only print right now, but I think it ships virtually anywhere that Amazon is available. That said, if you're ever running into trouble accessing, just shoot me an email. I'm available, throughout social media. Direct message me on Instagram, and I'll figure out a way that we can get it to you. So definitely want to make sure that just it's available. So if anybody has interest and isn't able to find it through sort of like the traditional methods, just let me know, and I'll figure out a way we can get you.
Definitely, because I think it's important that, because comic books and a lot of some people are doing animation and comic work in Pakistan as well, and it's something, the work is very diverse and very interesting. So I'm pretty sure this should be a very good addition, for inspiration sake as well, because the sort of work I have come across so far is a bit more contemporary. It's like the Miss Marvel sort of format, which is good and which is needed as well, because but I think the Zindaan angle, the storytelling, that's pretty unique, and sort of, because obviously living in Lahore, the walled city, and it's done to death, but this is a very unique, from what I saw, it was a very unique angle to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I hope that other people are inspired to do the same. We have such great history, in the area, and even you don't need to go that far back. I mean, you could just go back to the 70s of Pakistan, and sort of, it's something that always, I think, distance in time gives you a little bit of psychological distance to offer more sort of pointed critique. So if you are criticizing the current era, you might get sort of wrapped in people's emotions and politics. But if you split and you say, okay, I'm going to critique what happened 30 years ago, or maybe 100 years ago, or discuss what happened 200 or 300 years ago, people are much more tolerant and able to sort of palate that. And I think it's a great way for us to maybe even have modern discussions, but disguised in historical problems. And you see that when some of the best sort of literary works where even Shakespeare, which was written, a long time ago, still can be a vehicle to critique what's going on more modern, contemporarily. So that, I think, is one of the sort of like subtle and neat tricks of literature and art that you can do, which is you can disguise critiques of things in other sort of eras or mediums of art, and that fosters the conversation and discussion about something that you want to sort of bring up.
Definitely. I think some of the key issues or problems that humanity has been facing, I think they were there, they're still there, but they're just sort of, they have different angles and more maybe tech oriented or whatever. But definitely, that's something that's very interesting way of human storytelling. Lastly, before we go, what are your future plans? What can we expect? More comics? Do you have any ideas in mind? Maybe if you're traveling to Pakistan, any way of interacting with some art schools here? What's on?
Yeah, definitely. I think number one is obviously we're still putting out Zindaan, so that's one of the things that we're going to continue. The Incapable Trump is paused right now. It may relaunch when Trump seeks his re-election. So
when he gets back on Twitter, I think that will be.
Yeah, that might be the time to restart it. So we do have to save our firepower for when he returns. But yeah, that's definitely there. The CL Psychiatrist, I'm going to kind of continue my work with creating volumes to teach concepts using comics. And actually, recently, this is sort of like first sneak peek of some new information that I'm working with one of my old colleagues to do a new graphic novel on transplant. One of my roles was as a transplant psychiatrist and working with organ transplantation. And so we're going to be working on hopefully a volume to do education for the patient on organ transplantation and the process and what goes into it as a means to kind of provide more comfort with the process. So that's a big thing that's in sort of the works, and hopefully we might see in the next year or so. Beyond that, I'm always excited to partner with folks who are interested in art or storytelling. I think a long-term interest of mine was to create like an anthology of comics that came out of Pakistan, just stories from Pakistan, and maybe in sort of like in a way of cultural sort of ambassadorship to the rest of the world, to say, okay, hey, here's just lots of different artists, cartoonists, writers coming together and putting stories about Pakistan or about an experience of a Pakistani to the world. So that's been an idea I've been kicking around for a while that I really want to do. If there are talented artists, writers, collaborators, the editors, whatever, I'd love to get in touch with you and try to put something together like that, something that would really, maybe like a love letter from Pakistan to the rest of the world, like, this is us, and something that combats all the other sort of negative press that's out there. And so that's one thing. I do hope to come back out to Pakistan. I really am interested in doing a tour of the northern areas. So I want to see that. Yeah, I'd love to come to the art schools and meet people, I think. And there was an opportunity a little while back with CFX Comics had done something, and the timing didn't line up. But if they're still around and they still have a plan to send people to different art schools, I'd love to join and meet with folks. And I hope to attend one of the Comic Cons in Pakistan at some point. I've been really eager to do that.
Yeah, they started off and they picked, I think I remember the first time it was announced, it was very exciting. Obviously, it's not as big as the Comic Cons we are familiar with from the American culture, but obviously it's a growing art form. But yeah, I'm not really sure where CFX stands right now, but in terms of growth and everything. But if you are in town, we can definitely look into getting some tours for art schools and.
Oh, I'd love to.
Students that can.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to meet with folks. And I think if I leave anything, I think we need to support our artists in the same way that we support and praise our doctors and engineers, because they all are going to contribute to the advancement of us. And I think that it's been a sort of ugly shame that we've neglected our most creative and talented sort of future minds. And I think that if there's anything I can say, hopefully, we'll get to a point where you don't have to be a doctor to then be doing art. I hope that one day parents and society in general will see it as valuable as somebody who hasn't gone to medical school. And so I know that right now this is sort of like the transition where you have to have one foot here and then one foot there to be sort of like accepted. And I hope that we can get to the point where we can really just say, hey, it's fantastic that you went into art, or it's fantastic you went into music, or fantastic you went into theater. We want to celebrate and appreciate and support you and nurture you for that in and of itself, in the way that we've done for doctors and engineers and the likes.
On this positive note and hopeful note, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully we'll be in touch, and whenever a new series is out, we would like to invite you back and get into a deep dive into.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the podcast you're doing for the diaspora and in Pakistan. It's amazing.
Thank you so much.